aimed at you. That's what matters.
Oh, gotcha.
Audio. Audio.
Test, test, test.
Test, test, test. It's a phone, so it'll work.
Oh, isn't it, doesn't the Hero have a audio too?
It does, but if that's gone, I want to have that.
Gotcha. Third time.
Third
And
time's
it's a charm.
a charm. All right. Let me pull up the notes I had from
Sure.
the second one. Ladies and gentlemen, an interview with Mr. Carter about the current protests that are happening in the National Football League and professional sports worldwide. How you doing, Mr. Carter?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So I wanted a military perspective, and I thought of Carter because of his military background and also his openness with sharing his mind, which I thought would be perfect for this assignment. So, Mr. Carter, how many years were you in the military?
I was in the Air Force for 8 years and 2 years in the Reserve.
Do you think that the protests right now that are happening in the National Football League and other sports worldwide are good?
Absolutely, I think they're wonderful. This whole country was founded on engaging in this civil discourse that we're having that's called our democracy. And anytime that somebody protests and has a reason to, I think is a wonderful event, because there's so many countries that you can't protest in, or at least not safely. So absolutely, I think that's what this country is founded on, being able to speak your mind and to stand for what you believe in, whether other people agree with it or not.
Do you mind repeating about Abe Lincoln?
Oh, yeah. One of the, sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, so again, the whole idea of the protest, especially the backlash that a lot of the football players are getting, especially the one here in Denver.
Brandon Marshall, linebacker, yep.
So my saying was that it reminds me of a story I heard from Abraham Lincoln, where he was sitting at a window and there was a group of men in front playing Dixie, and this is right after the war. And one of the secretaries came rushing over and closed his window and said, "I'm sorry, sir, I'll get out there and have them either arrested or shooed away." And Lincoln turned to him and said, "Absolutely not. This is why we fought that war." And I thought that was always a powerful story. I think I heard that when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and I thought, wow, that's what our country is about. I can fight for you being an American, even though I don't believe in what you believe in. It still makes us Americans.
So why do you think the public is outraged on this? Because I'm not sure if you knew, back in 2006, that was actually the first time when NFL players used to come out of the locker room and then they did the national anthem. Usually they did the national anthem and then they had the NFL players come out.
And that's a concern, especially for those people that refuse to stand for the national anthem, which, as a military person, it was expected of you and it was required of you. It wasn't a choice, because you were part of the military. But being a citizen, a civilian, you have that right. And I've protested myself with that, so I have no problem with that. If they want to go back and switch it, by all means do, and then of course the football players certainly will not have that opportunity. But to blast them for, so to speak, speaking their mind by kneeling or protesting or whatever, I think it's just wonderful that they're able to do it.
How do you feel about other teams not supporting their own players? Because in most recent events, as of last night during Monday Night Football, the Falcons and the Saints, instead of having the main flag, they had the main flag, but also afterwards, both teams went to the center of the field and they linked arms together to make sure nobody would go down on a knee.
It's their choice. I mean, again, I believe that they have the right to do that, even though I disagree with them. And I will stand upright for them as far as allowing them to do that, as long as it's not imposing anything. So when you say linking their arms so nobody can kneel, I certainly hope that if there was a player on there that did not want to link arms, that he would either be allowed to stay on the sidelines or the opportunity to kneel at one of the ends as a form of protest. So as long as that's available, I say more power to you. Go ahead and link all the arms you want to show your approval or disapproval. But the bottom line is, if you're trying to do that so that you stop somebody else from basically executing their constitutional rights and you know what we are based on, then no, you're wrong, and you shouldn't be allowed to do it.
That's a good segue to the next question.
Sure, but let me add one thing about
great.
all of this, and that is patriotism is an empty emotion as far as I'm concerned. And what I mean by that is too many people get that feeling of patriotism without any action. It's sort of like faith. Without action, it's worthless.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you can stand in front of me and tell me that I protest them because I have done these things in this country, you probably are not going to get my approval or my opinion on what I think about you.
Right.
So just keep that in mind too.
How do you feel about public opinions like those who are rejecting the protests?
That's fine. I have no problem with that. Again, they can reject it because that's that. Look, anytime we have a positive and a negative, you're going to have some type of a discourse, and that's what propels our country forward. That's what makes our Constitution, as far as I'm concerned, a living document that it's allowed to change, and it's allowed to change within the public arena. And I think that's an amazing opportunity. What other country has something like this? There is no other country. We can sway our government, to be honest with you, very easily by getting together and doing some of these things. We think that it's impossible, but it's not. We do it all the time. We're doing it right now with exactly what you're talking about and interviewing me about. So I think it's like I said, I think it's a wonderful opportunity.
This isn't the first time we've seen a protest in America or even on an international stage. You were probably a kid when this happened, but it was during the 1968 Olympics with the two runners from America and the Australian runner.
Sure, the two black
Mm-hmm.
gentlemen that put up their fists in black power salutes.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about it?
Fantastic. Again, I didn't know who they were at the time, but I did know, growing up in that time period, what black power meant. It was really the first time that African Americans could call or point to something that was African Americanness. Prior to that, there was this enculturation notion that people were supposed to become part of one big society, and that's not necessarily true. They tried to say that African Americans did not have an identity, that they were now part of the American fabric without an identity. They just amalgamated, even though their skin is black. Well, that quickly changed, and one of the offshoots of that was the Black Power movement, where blackness was now celebrated rather than looked upon as a negative. So when I saw that, it was a wonderful, protest. The part that I neglected when I was a kid, and now I find really, really powerful, is the third member, and that's the white guy that stands below those two. And very few people know the history. I think it's starting to come out more and more.
Because ESPN just did a documentary about the perspective of the white of the Australian.
Right, you told me about that, and I'm like, wow, I'm sorry I missed it, because I remember when I heard about the story that first the two African Americans that were holding their fists up with gloves, those gloves were actually his. And so that meant one of them was wearing a backward glove. But the simple fact that, during that time, and I can't remember it because I was so young, but, Australia was under an apartheid system like South Africa. So this gentleman supporting these two African Americans was pretty much frowned upon when he got back, and he was ostracized, and I believe he was basically forced out of participating in any type of sports, national or international.
Even though he was one of the best runners in Australia, he wasn't allowed to compete in the 72
Exactly.
games.
But he made his point, and what was fantastic is that we just commemorated a statue of the three of them, the two men with their fists up and the one man standing below that stood as with them, which is pretty darn amazing, and that's what our country's about. And I always said that never before in the history of mankind have we seen a country like this. And if I give credit to this country for one thing, it's the fact that we can live together with so many different cultures and ethnicities. That's just mind-blowing. Will we have prejudice and racism? We'll have that forever. That is not going to change. Get over it and get used to it. You know, that's our struggle, and that's where, again, we learn from each other. We learn what's right and what's wrong. We have to have that. Otherwise, we basically pigeonhole everybody as being the same. Probably one things I hate is when people say, I don't see color. I don't see my friend as being black. Well, hell, you better see him as black, because that's what he or she is. And that means there's a whole history behind that blackness. So don't try to be a friend of the blacks or Hispanics by saying that you don't see their color. You're better off saying, hey, I understand where they're coming from. I know a little bit about their history. I'll never know what they experience, or what they go through, but they're Americans and they're part of me, and I'm going to learn about them and they're going to learn about me. That not every white person is a card-carrying member of the KKK, and so on and so on. So, yeah, I think that this country is probably one of the greatest experiments in history, and as far as I'm concerned, on that level, it's working. I know that I have cousins in Germany, and they came from the east side when the wall was up. They were socialists and communists. When the wall came down and I had a chance to go over and meet them and get to know them, one of the things that I used to just couldn't fathom or understand was when they said, well, we don't have racism in our country. And I'd look at them and go, of course you don't. You're all white. How do you have racism if everybody's the same color? And their response was, well, we do have Cubans, we do have Nigerian, or not Nigerians, but one of the African countries that was socialist at the time, and we have Vietnamese. Yeah, but you have like 5 of them in the entire country, so until you live next to and engage with them, you really aren't an American.
Right. So how do you feel about the most recent U.S. soccer player who's kneeling during the national anthem?
Well,
and participates in sporting events outside of the country?
Yeah, that's always a tough one, because being in the military, I knew that when I was out of this country, I represented the United States, and I represented a very specific concept of the United States, and it was something that I intentionally decided upon when I joined the military. And that is, okay, for these number of years, you have me. You can do whatever you want with me. If I'm going to be a bullet catcher, I'll be a bullet catcher. If I'm going to be a pilot, I'll be a pilot. If I'm going to be a peacemaker, I'll be a peacemaker. But you have me. Once I'm out, then don't bother me again. I will say and do whatever I want. So when I see these athletes going out of country, I'm a bit torn, because they're representing the United States, and they should represent the United States as the United States. And like I said, I want them to protest, and I want them to have that freedom, but I also want them to show the rest of the world that, with all of our problems, we still are one country.
Right.
Now again, the struggle I'm having is, but don't you want them to show or see that we are allowed to protest, that we are able to get on one knee, and it doesn't make me any less American? That's a really hard concept for other countries to understand. And I remember seeing many, many years ago, just near the end of the Iraq War, they brought a bunch of kids together, American kids, Iraqi kids, and I think there were a couple of others from other countries. And they were talking about the politics. And a couple of the American kids, when they brought up George Bush, said, yeah, what an idiot, somebody should blast him, and blah, blah, blah. And the Iraqi kids were completely stunned that we were allowed to talk this way about our leader. And I thought, wow, Isn't that amazing that we can honor the office of presidency and give the office all the respect, but still realize that the man that's holding that office is just a man with all of his quirks and difficulties and qualms, and we can make fun of him, and it takes nothing away from the respect that we have for the office.
Yeah.
And I thought that was amazing, because the looks on those kids, the Iraqi kids' face, and when I say kids, they were 17, 18 years old, I'll remember those looks forever, because they were just completely stunned that these American kids could say something like that. So.
And finally, I also interviewed Mr. Carter because he's also been a teacher in DPS specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
For how many years?
Ooh, it's gone on 15, 16 years now.
16 years.
Uh-huh.
And last question, as of currently right now, Aurora Central's football team was the most recent high school team. Almost every single player on their team decided to take a knee during the national anthem. How do you feel about that?
Of course, it makes me incredibly happy, because there we are in the arena of our democracy, and we are now teaching the next generation what it is to be an American, and that you should not be afraid to take a stand and express your viewpoints. It's the old saying, they came for the Jews, and I said nothing. They came from the homosexuals, and I said nothing. They came for all these other people, and I said nothing. They finally came for me. And that's the thing about America that I think is so great, is that we can teach our kids, and I love teaching the students to take responsibility and get a voice, and get out there and express your voice, no matter how much your voice shakes. When you're doing it, say it. And I think that these young men that are taking the knee on the football team is amazing. And I hope more do it, to be honest with you. And again, do it for the right reason. Do it with a conscience of understanding, rather than just doing it because it's the end thing to do.
Right. All right. Hopefully, for the last time, that was the interview. Thank you, Mr.
Wow.
Carter.
For the third time, you're welcome.
And
good.
Cut.
I hope it worked. I hope you say